Are you ready to get spooky? I hope so, because you are now listening to a new episode of Ghoulish with me, Max Booth, a host. And on today's episode of Ghoulish, I am chatting with Jonathan Raab, who recently wrote a short story called Huntin Them Hills with Joel and Big Howie, which I published in the latest issue of Dark Moon Digest. That is issue 38 of Dark Moon Digest. Now, this short story, Huntin Them Hills with Joel and Big Howie, it's told in the format of a found footage style, okay? So each section of the story is the description of a new episode of this cable hunting TV show, and as we get further into the season of this fake show, creepy things tend to happen. Not gonna say anything else, but it's a really good short story, and I hope you pick it up after listening to my conversation with Jonathan Raab about found footage. A brand new episode of Ghoulish, hosted by me, Max Booth. Enjoy, folks. Enjoy. Oh, God, I can't laugh anymore. I can't. Enjoy the podcast. So I think the best way to begin this episode is to start with a short story you recently wrote for a magazine called Huntin Them Hills with Joel and Big Howie. So if you could just begin by giving me a breakdown of the genesis of how this idea came to you.
Yeah, so like a lot of people, I grew up in a rural community where sort of one of the predominant cultures was hunting culture, right? Which is kind of adjacent to gun culture. It's a little bit different. There's a lot of overlap. But most of the men in the community, and it wasn't exclusively men, but most of the men in the community hunting, was the big thing to look forward to, depending on what season it was. And I actually, even though I'm not much of a hunter myself, besides, going a few times, I have a lot of like positive memories associated with, the beginning of deer season and like the smell on the air of like, the cold weather coming, getting up early, being out in the woods, that type of thing. And I'd wanted to write a story for a while about hunters who decided to start their own like public access show where they kind of like gave terrible hunting advice. And the reason for that is because if you've ever been around hunting culture, like everyone thinks they're an expert, but most people are actually really bad at it. And they'll give you a ton of advice, and usually it's all bad advice.
That's funny, though, because coming from someone who has never been hunting and has no knowledge of it, I honestly didn't realize it was supposed to be bad advice most of the time until
now. In the story, it's pretty good advice in the story. Actually, okay. It's pretty good. But the funny part was going to be like they're giving like really awful advice. I started writing that story, and then I realized I was like, I actually want to make this probably, a horror story. So I kept that basic concept and I made the guys a little bit more competent. So the stuff they're talking about, like gun safety and hunting and stuff, that's all pretty basic, positive stuff. So
that all made a lot of sense to me. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that happen a lot with you? Like you'll be trying to write something not so supernatural, spooky, and then you just kind of give into the urge to do so.
Yeah, usually I never try to write something that isn't supernatural or spooky, almost never. So this time, when I tried to get outside my comfort zone a little bit, I found myself right back in it. So, but I think it worked out all right. So,
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, this was when we were reading the slush. I mean, this one had no hesitation. Both of us just read it and thought, "Yeah, this one is going in." There was no debate about it. So, because a lot of the time when we read slush, we get a big pile going of maybes and we talk about it a long time. But this one, there was no conversation. We both agreed immediately this is going into the magazine.
well, cool. I'm glad to hear that, especially coming from yourself not being familiar with the culture and all that. I was afraid it might not resonate with people who didn't grow up around that sort of thing, but I'm glad it did with you.
Yeah, I think you were wise to give it the format that you have, which is basically it's in the found footage genre
Mhm.
of this cable show. You tend to write a lot of things that'll kind of experimental in format. I mean, I know you just released a book that is I don't want to fuck this up. It's like a novelization of a fake movie.
Yeah, you did not fuck that up.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
Okay.
it's last year. It's called Camp Ghoul Mountain Part Six, the official novelization. So I love like slasher movies. I know they get a bad rap sometimes, and often rightly so. But for me, they're sort of foundational as to my understanding of what horror movie and cinema can be. Because I grew up in the late '80s, early '90s, and my movie monsters were Freddy Krueger and Jason and Michael Myers. That was my pantheon. Rather than the Universal folks, which I sort of discovered later in life or got into later in life. And I wanted to write a slasher because I hadn't done something like that. But like all things slasher, I couldn't come up with any ideas that weren't extremely derivative.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because it's
Yeah.
like hard to do that. Like if you can do it and do it well, that's fine, but you're still kind of going through the motions. So I kind of came up with this idea. I said, well, what if I wrote a novelization, kind of like those old paperbacks that you could buy when the movies came out? You might not be old enough to go see the movie, but maybe you can, sneak the book out of the bookstore or whatever. Maybe not let your parents see you're reading it, and still sort of like get slasher adjacent, right?
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll write a novelization, and then I'll take my love of film and behind the scenes stuff and trivia, and I'll add all that stuff to this movie that doesn't actually exist. So when you read the book, you get the novelization. So it's like reading a slasher movie novel, but half the book is sort of the behind the scenes stuff that's going on as well.
It sounds like such a complicated process. Did you? I like in my head, I'm imagining pages of insane outlines being involved. Was this the case or no?
Yeah, generally, I kind of outlined the basic plot of the movie, and then I kind of went in and I said, okay, what was happening behind the scenes, before, during, and then well after the movie's production, and I kind of just started moving those pieces around until they started to fit. I am pretty sure there's got to be a contradiction somewhere or a mistake in there somewhere. No one's pointed one out yet, but there's got to be mistakes in there somewhere because it definitely felt like it was getting away from me at a couple points. I was definitely writing it and I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to understand this, but luckily the reception's been overwhelmingly positive. So.
I think myself and many other writers of this genre were extremely envious of you for coming up with this idea because just thinking about it now, I can imagine how much fun it probably was to create this.
Yeah, especially if you're at all like me, and I'm sure you are. Like, obviously, I'm familiar with your work and stuff you do with the podcast and all that. Like, if you're a horror junkie and you love the behind the scenes stuff, if you love the history of the form and the genre, it was a lot of fun to sort of create my own mythology that was sort of born out of and inspired by you know reading books about how they made Halloween.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or reading like film criticism and stuff like that. Um, a really good series. My friend Tom Breen turned me on to, which you published one of his stories in a Dark Moon Digest a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, he recommended a series of books to me called the Devil's Advocates series. And what they are, they're extremely slim volumes that are essentially academic writing on horror movies, like a deep dive. So almost all of John Carpenter's movies are in there. You'll see like Suspiria or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Most of the big heavy hitter horror movies have these companion academic writing pieces, and they're pretty accessible, but they get into the detail and the theory, and they're a pretty quick read. And I would recommend them to anyone who's got an interest in the subject. So, consuming all that stuff and watching the behind the scenes stuff on DVDs, it was a lot of fun to take all that useless knowledge and put it to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow, those books sound pretty awesome. I'm gonna have to check them out, and I'll leave a link in the show notes of the podcast for anyone else who finds that interesting. Let's go back real quick to the found footage. To the found footage genre. What was your introduction to this?
I think for a lot of people, the Blair Witch Project obviously is
Yeah,
sort of
that was
the
mine.
the primary text.
Hmm.
Um, I saw that movie in the theater, and that's a film that people have sort of written off because of what it did to movies afterwards, and kind of changed the industry, and it's become parodied and referenced to the point where it's not even like its own thing anymore. Um, that being said, it remains one of my favorite movies because I think if you watch it for what it is and what it was, it's a genuinely scary movie with amazing atmosphere and some pretty good performances, all things considered, and some moments in it that are still scary, even though you kind of know all the tricks by now. So that's obviously the big one, but I think the first one that I ever saw, and I'm afraid I don't know what the name of it is, and I'd rather keep it that way because
Okay.
it's sort of like this half memory that I'm not even sure is real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of more fun to pretend that this was like a errant broadcast that was never seen again. But there was this found footage movie that I caught like half of it on, I think, a Canadian television station. So I grew up in upstate New York, so I could get like channels out of Toronto and stuff when the weather was good. And it was kind of fuzzy and hard to see. And it was a family that was under siege by aliens who were like trying to like abduct them.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and I had never seen anything like it before, but being a kid watching it, it was recorded, and I'm thinking to myself, is this supposed to be real? You know what I mean? Like, is this like a documentary? Like, what is this? And I'm sure someone out there in your audience will know what I'm talking about, but that scared the shit out of me in a way that I hadn't been scared by a movie before, especially seeing it sort of out of context and, flipping through the channels and then just seeing this like horrifying, what appears to be real, like, alien monster movie. So that was probably my first exposure to the format.
Wow. It made me think of like like how kids, the whole stereotype of kids watching like a fuzzy pornographic movie,
Right, right.
but your parents walk in on you, what are you watching? Oh, just this found footage little movie about aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds terrifying. I have no idea what that could even be, but now I want to watch it. Although probably, I mean, even if you saw it again now, it would not have the same effect on you as it did in that specific moment.
And that's kind of why I want to sort of like let it lie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to find it because it's probably not very good.
You never will know. Maybe the movie doesn't exist. Who knows?
That's possible.
You could
That's
have
possible.
dreamed it,
Yeah.
dreamt it. Yeah. So, what? I mean, I know you wanted to write a story about hunting and all these terrible tips, but what led to the decision to write it in the format of a found footage show?
So you did mention I've written a novel that's sort of metamedia horror. I've written another novel called The Hillbilly Moonshine Massacre, which is about a local sheriff who got elected because he had a sort of conspiracy theory call-in show podcast, and then that gets turned into a public access television show where a camera crew follows him around as he accuses people of being space vampires and whatnot. And so I've been playing in this space for a while, and I actually set it in the same county and area as that series of stories, and it just seemed like a natural fit. I like this idea that you're not seeing, especially in this story, not to give too much away, but you're not seeing the whole picture. You're seeing like clips and snippets, and some of them are poorly edited together, and it doesn't quite all add up as sort of a linear narrative. That type of storytelling and filmmaking that the found footage genre excels at when it's done well really appeals to me, because that's in a way that's kind of how real life works. Like you come upon people or interact with people in small chunks and snippets, and it doesn't all quite add up. And I tried to apply that to a story where reality itself is sort of like unraveling and breaking down for our two protagonists as the show continues. So as they get deeper into the season and get better at producing the show, something that starts happening in the background starts moving towards the forefront. So it just seemed like a good way to complement, that theme of the story, that idea of the supernatural moving through and manifesting. The found footage format seems to fit that really well.
Yeah, I found it legitimately unsettling, and you're completely right. Using the technique of film editing, being able to cut away and
Mm-hmm.
cut back in the middle of something else is such a great idea, great method of establishing something scary. And you really mastered that with this story, and I'm sure the same with the book you mentioned, which I haven't read, but I'm gonna now. It sounds awesome. I didn't know, I didn't realize that you had also written a novel in the same format. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's not quite found footage. There are found footage elements within that. Uh, but if the metamedia stuff appeals to you, I think you'll dig it.
Can you think of any little books that also feature found footage?
I think found footage. I've read some stories. Like I know Oren Gray has written in that. Gemma Files has written like found footage style stories as well. I also think of like any other metamedia stories. Stephen Graham Jones's Demon Theory is a big one that comes
Oh
to
yeah.
mind. But I know other writers are sort of playing with that and experimenting with that. And I'm those are all extremely talented writers. They're all top tier. And I aspire to be as good as they are. But that being said, even when the stories are as fantastic as those writers, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt if you're trying something new with the format. That's going to attract me to it in a way that sort of a standard story might not. I might give you a bit of an unfair advantage when I'm reading it. You know what I mean? Just because you're trying something risky.
I think I do the same thing. It's something new. It's something refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to movies now, I assume you've been watching them beyond the Blair Witch Project and
Sure.
also the one you made up in your head. So, what are like some other standouts that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I really like found footage movies, but I'll be the first to tell you that 9 out of 10 of them are terrible or almost unwatchable.
What would you
Um,
say? Or some mistakes you see commonly in these that they.
uh, yeah. So a lot of characters, what I describe as acting, right? Where they're like really hammering the dialogue. A lot of found footage movies will get ground down in like the characters arguing, especially arguing over why you're filming us or put that thing away or whatever. Like just if you're a filmmaker, just abandon that a whole idea that you have to have that scene and just we'll accept that they have a camera. You know what I mean? Like we're watching the movie, we accept that they have a camera. Um, and I think found footage can sometimes be an excuse to, they're typically going to be a cheaper, lower budget movie. So when they have an overuse of, bad camera effects or static, to sort of drown something out, that use sparingly can be effective. But if you over rely on it, it gets boring. If someone's running through, I'm trying to think of a movie I watched, it was, I think, Alien Abduction or something. Um, it was like people just running through darkened fields and you can't see anything.
Yeah,
Right.
that's great
That's not good.
entertainment.
Right, exactly. So I much prefer to focus on the good ones. I think if you want to go all the way back, there's a film from 1992 that was a BBC television show called Ghostwatch.
Oh yes.
Yes, if you're familiar with it, you know how great it is. I want to say that's one of the first, if not the first, found footage movies.
Besides,
Um,
was Cannibal Holocaust the first one?
you're probably right. You're probably right. Yeah, I haven't actually seen that one though. But
I
yeah,
I
you're
don't
right.
recommend it. It's not good. It's not
Most
good.
people, most people don't. I'll probably skip it.
Yeah.
I'd check out Ghost Watch. That one absolutely holds up. Um, some recent ones, VHS 1 and 2, I really like. Hell House 1 and 2, Hell House LLC. I think they're on Shudder.
I
I
think
really like,
so. Yeah.
yeah, I really like those. I'm a sucker for the Paranormal Activity movies. Like I like almost all of them, even the later sequels. Um, I'm a really big fan of one I just saw last year. Oren Gray recommended it to me. It's called Occult.
Okay.
It's a Japanese horror movie. I actually watched it on YouTube because that was the only place I could find it. But it's by the guy, I believe he also directed Noroi the Curse, which if you've seen that one. Um, Lake Mungo is one that a lot of people like. That usually gets bandied about as like being sort of like an upscale
That's a good one.
found.
I like that one.
Yeah, yeah. But I also think of films like David Lynch's Lost Highway, which has found footage elements in it that I think are used to like really excellent, terrifying effect.
That's one of the few Lynch movies I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, no, you should definitely check that one out. I he's hit or miss with me, and that one's a hit for sure.
You know, I try to think. I'm not like in the loop too much with recent found footage movies, but I have to imagine that like with the revolution of technology and how everything's going, people would be taking advantage of it. Like one that does come to mind that I did see and I thought was pretty okay was the movie Unfriended. Did you see that?
No, I haven't. I skipped that because that looked terrible. But if you say it's actually pretty good, I'll give it a shot.
Well, listen, I went in thinking it was going to be trash. I was watching it with my stepkids.
Mhm.
I ended up liking it quite a bit. I mean, I don't know. They really convinced me of the format. It was good. It was just like a well, now I don't remember. I think it I think it was like a big bunch of Skype calls going on, maybe.
Okay, okay.
And yeah, I liked it a lot. But I mean, has anyone made like some YouTube found footage films? Not found footage films on YouTube, but like of YouTubers doing things, or I don't know, like a Vine found footage film.
Yeah, no, that would be a really good idea. You'd have to write it carefully, especially if you're bringing in all these different, people posting different videos that are disparate, right? But that come together. You would think that's got to be happening out there. I have seen some really interesting stuff like TikTok videos, like single serving TikTok videos that are pretty disturbing. So I think people are experimenting with that short video format. It might not be like getting released on Redbox, but you hang around weird Twitter enough, horror Twitter, and people post some fun stuff.
I want to see some found footage gifs. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a good idea. Do you follow Trevor Henderson on Twitter or Facebook or anything? He's
I
an artist.
I think so. Yes.
So he specializes in taking photographs that people send him, and he'll insert monsters into them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, like big ones like Siren Head or like Long Horse. He'll insert these like little creepy critters in the background in a way that makes it look sort of organic and like it's a real photo. That stuff's usually a lot of fun.
It's just what a great like age for this genre. I think the things we can do, like just doing these photo manipulations,
Hmm.
it's a fantastic time to be a fan of the genre. I think.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about all these different formats and stuff. It's very easy to start getting creative and putting some stuff out there. You just start like Trevor like just started putting these photos out there. Now he's got a huge following. Um, so it's definitely easier than ever to sort of create content like this, and I think that's generally a good thing.
Hell yeah! Before I leave, I was just reminded that when I a few years back I showed my stepkid Ghostwatch, and I convinced her it was a real thing, and to this day I think she still almost believes it was real, and that's another magic thing about found footage films. You can skill children.
Yeah. Yes, that is good, and she wouldn't be alone because a ton of people in the UK when it premiered thought it was real as well. So she's in good company, and I think you're getting at something that I like about the genre, and that it works best because when tricks your brain. Like, I know I'm watching a movie, right? I'm sitting down to watch a movie. I rented it, got it from the library, whatever. But the way found footage works, when it really works, is that it tricks your subconscious, and it sort of short circuits that, it gets past that disbelief, and sort of convinces your subconscious that what you're seeing is indeed real, because the format, the shaky cam, the camcorder, the people acknowledging the camera, those are all sort of symptoms to indicate that what you're seeing is real. And I think that's sort of the magic of the format for me.
I saw this one movie. I don't think it was actually a good movie, but I saw it as a kid, and it was a found footage film. I don't know the name of it now, but it was about these criminals just going on a crime spree. And I think, obviously, it was marketed as oh yeah, we found the footage of these infamous criminals, and it made me sick to my stomach, man. I did not enjoy myself watching that. Same with those Faces of Death.
Right. Yeah, I never rented those, and I think I'd prefer to have my imagination conjure up those horrors than actually rather see them. So,
well, the thing with Faces of Death is most of them will fake, so I guess you could call that a found footage film.
That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't recommend them. I honestly don't know why my mom let me rent those at age 10, but she did, and now I'm doing a podcast about found footage films. So
yeah, you turned out great.
Yeah. How can folks find you online, Jonathan?
So I'm primarily on Twitter, shitposting about Star Wars and other subjects at Jonathan Raab 1. MuzzlelandPress.com is not super active anymore, but whenever we have a new release or I have a story published, I'll usually mention something there. You can read my new story in the latest issue of Dark Moon Digest, Huntin Them Hills with Joel and Big Howie. And I've got a novel called Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 6, the official novelization, that if this conversation at all piqued your interest, I think you're really going to dig.
All right, and that was Jonathan Raab talking about found footage, baby. Go, if you enjoyed the episode, go buy his books. He just talked about them fucking 10 seconds ago. And if you enjoyed this episode of Ghoulish, why don't you go support us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/PMM Publishing. And if you also like the show, why don't you go leave a review on iTunes and all those other places you can leave reviews. Go subscribe to Dark Moon Digest at perpetualpublishing.com. And whatever you do, folks, live spooky. Die spooky!